All right, next it is my pleasure to introduce Derek Nener-Plante from Maine DOT, who will share regarding the AASHTO specifications and update us on the ETF.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, and thanks for the chance to speak here to you this afternoon. So what I'd like to update you on is some happenings through AASHTO that relate to pavement preservation specifications and how they'll be handled moving forward. Some of this is, there's been a lot of change at AASHTO in the last couple years, as Tom kind of highlighted. Won't go through that in a lot of detail, just kind of hit the high notes. But what used to be the subcommittee on materials was a collection of the materials engineers for all the states, and they handled standards. That has since changed a bit and meeting a need for pavement preservation. So I want to talk about that a little bit, how this is going to work, how it impacts you in your job, either in industry or at a state DOT, and what's to look out for in the next year. What used to be SOM, Subcommittee on Materials, is now the Committee on Materials and Pavements, and their charge to that volunteer committee is to maintain specifications for construction and maintenance materials. Anytime you look in any one of the state specifications, you are referencing M320 or a practice, R30 or T164, any one of the hundreds of tests we have to evaluate and accept construction materials. So that is all maintained through this committee. They get approved, they get changed over time, they are held up to date. So they have these different designations, MRT. Once you deal with it for a while, you get used to it. I'm still getting used to it myself. Again, you're not meant to see this chart. This gives you an idea of the process by which these standards, this isn't just rubber stamped by 5 people by a quick vote. All these standards are balloted at 2 levels. They're balloted at a smaller committee that is basically about that material, be it aggregate, asphalt, whatever it is. It has to make it through that committee that has a certain membership, and then it has to make it through a ballot of all the 52 members of COMP, or what used to be Subcommittee on Materials. Any negatives, any of them have to be resolved. Doesn't matter if the vote was 51-1. If one state or one agency votes negative and it's found persuasive, it doesn't go forward. So it's quite a process to get them approved, but it also leads to the credibility. People know AASHTO puts out good test standards that have been reviewed by experts in the field. They haven't just been looked over once and put out there. We use rolling ballots throughout the year. We have annual meetings in August. The structure, again, is off of what used to be called tech sections. They're technical subcommittees now. But again, based on material. You can see metals, liquid asphalt, they all have a separate section so that experts in those fields can handle the standards related to that material. There are even more than 19 now because there's more pavement stuff being funneled into this committee. The reorganization that we're talking about, why it's no longer Subcommittee on Materials, is the Joint Technical Committee on Pavements has now been folded into SOM. So SOM plus JTCOP somehow equals COMP. Either way, that's one group. That's how AASHTO decided to reorganize. The Joint Technical Committee was on design and materials, I believe. So now that's one big group. States or agencies will have up to 3 members of the committee, but they only get 1 vote. So the thought is you'd have a materials engineer and you'd have your pavement lead, and they would be your 2, maybe you have 3 liaisons to the committee. But again, not each person gets a vote. It's a vote for a state. The annual meeting, again, we meet, the group meets every August, the 2nd week of August. This year, it's in Cincinnati, Ohio. Basically a full week. This is not a listen to presentations conference. There's probably less than a day of the full week is presentations. These are all business subcommittee meetings. They have full Robert's Rules orders. There's a lot of work that gets done in that 1 week. If you want to see how the sausage gets made, this is the one to go to. This isn't just for the subcommittee and I'm gonna get in trouble unless there's somebody from AASHTO here, but I should have said comp instead of SOM. I'm still learning. It's not just for state DOTs. Industry is encouraged to be friends of technical subcommittees. That means you see everything. You see all the ballots. You see all the draft standards. You can comment on them. You don't get a vote, but you can still provide a lot of good feedback. We get some of the best feedback from the technical friends of the committees. Say, you should look at this, you shouldn't do that, all right? Academia, same thing, trade organizations. So if you're interested in what I'm about to talk about for pavement preservation, let me know. We're always looking for other people to review these to make sure that whatever AASHTO is putting out for standards is something quality. The balloting is all done online now, as people tell me. I have no experience, but it was done by mail in the past. But it's quite a process. Again, these are looked at in detail. It's not just the annual meeting that business gets done. Essentially, every technical subcommittee has a mid-year meeting to get business done throughout the year. They're generally between November and February, and they discuss any standards that are in process. So it's not just that one meeting. There's a lot of work that happens before then. How does it relate here? Okay. The problem is that many of our pavement preservation treatments don't fit nicely into what used to be the subcommittee on materials categories. You have emulsified asphalts and aggregates. Where do you put a micro? It's a little bit of both, right? For a time, we tried to put it in with emulsions, but you're still talking about a system, not an individual material. What the problem that was brought up was that they can't be divided into the different components. Then you're not getting the same amount of review. And as we all know why we're here, preservation is gaining more and more traction, and there's more pressure to get AASHTO standards for these treatments. So there's some uniformity across states, some transfer of knowledge. The Technical Subcommittee 5B, Bridge and Pavement Preservation, was created. This was created in the fall of 2016, so it's relatively young. But essentially, its aim is to cover those treatments that aren't covered somewhere else. So this technical subcommittee doesn't handle just emulsion testing. If we're talking about testing just emulsion, there's a group for that. This is about the systems. An example are, how do you design a chip seal? That's what this group will handle. Same thing, you could say painting a bridge is a preservation activity. There's already a group that handles paint, so we're not gonna take that on. Otherwise, I'd get 500 standards instead of my 40. There's a leader, there's leadership to each one of these technical subcommittees. I'm the chair of 5B. I have a vice chair, Travis Welbeck from West Virginia DOT, and then we have liaisons from Federal Highway and AASHTO. These are the approved standards as of today that this technical subcommittee is handling. So some of these are older. You can see the second two numbers is when it was approved, so they're all very recent. A lot of these have come from the Emulsion Task Force. You can see a pattern that we have a material spec and a design spec for a lot of treatments. Chip seal, slurry seal, etc. Fog seal, the last four there were just approved and published in the last month. So if you haven't looked recently, take a look. What you don't see here is construction specs, and I'll get to that in a second. So how does that impact you? I realize that a lot of people in this room aren't involved with comp at all. Know who your comp representative is. Get involved with it. Reference these standards. If they're not good enough to be referenced for a reason, let your comp representative or me know and we'll adjust it. If these don't get referenced in state specs, we're going to get rid of them. We don't need standards that no one is using. We're trying to meet a need here. So if they need to get changed, we want to know. A lot of them are what we call provisional. They have 8 years where the thought is you work the kinks out of it and then it's got to either be approved or it's gone forever. So a lot of these are provisional. We want to see whether people are going to use them. Otherwise, we're not going to continue with it. At the last meeting, I said, stay tuned on the construction specs. Well, finally, I have something to report on it. What about construction specs? With preservation, a lot of what we are asked to do comes down to the construction specs. The materials for a chip seal may not be all that complicated, but how you apply it is. And that's where the details are. That's where most of our failures happen. It's not from materials, it's from workmanship, something about how we accept it. So Here was the issue that's at hand. You've got 3 AASHTO committees. You have COMP, which is materials. They have never handled construction specs. Anything that COMP has or SOM has published never talks about acceptance, QC plans. Really, it stays out of that. It says how you accept it is your choice. Here's what the materials need to meet. The Committee on Construction, through AASHTO, they publish construction guide specifications, but their frequency is once about every 5 to 10 years. That doesn't seem to be responsive enough to changes in industry. And finally, the Committee on Maintenance last year resolved, they said AASHTO needs to publish guide specifications for these preservation treatments, but they don't have the infrastructure to do it. They don't really publish anything, so they would have a hard time getting up on and getting to a point where they'd be able to produce something. It's a little bit different for us in the Northeast. I know, at least speaking from Maine, our maintenance people, they plow. That's the primary purpose. But in other parts of the nation, maintenance is more, they're the ones doing the chip seal. They're the ones crack sealing. Whereas I think in the Northeast, we're more apt to our maintenance means something else. What happened was these 3 groups, it was a large discussion over the last 3 months after maintenance made that resolution, so a task group was put together with representation from all 3 committees. We talked at length, discussed what the problems were, and came up with this resolution. This is out of a resolution that's going to go to AASHTO this month. And the big thing to see here is that it's going to be recommended that COMP, materials and pavements, will be assigned the responsibility for reviewing and publishing the construction guide specs for preservation treatments, even though that's really not in the scope. The question why? Because we have the infrastructure to do it. We have a very set balloting process that has all been flushed out. So the thought is, let's try it through COMP for a number of years and see how it works. Now, as a compromise to that, what we want to do is, through Technical Subcommittee 5B, you're going to have representation from both the maintenance and the construction end of AASHTO have voting privileges in that technical subcommittee. So it will be those representatives' job to make sure that they are representing not just their state, but the whole of the committee, and handle these guide specifications. And other than that, it will follow all the same rules that we do for everything else and how we publish material standards. So that's been the recommendation. The AASHTO spring meeting is coming up in only a couple weeks in Tennessee. Hopefully it will pass there. If it passes, the implementation will happen immediately, and that 5B will start handling construction guide specs, most likely starting with a diamond grinding spec right away. We've already had some names as far as representation from the other committees. What's going to happen as far as publishing is, a lot of people, well, how will they get published? Will they be in my materials book, which they don't even print anymore, but will it be with the materials standards? No. Again, we're using COMP as the vehicle to publish it and to review it. It will be posted and published like all the other guide specs that AASHTO has, but it'll just be doing it more often with more review. So they will be separate in that way. So it will give the idea is to have a guide spec that's not a material test that you reference, that you could copy most of that and insert it into your state, county, town specification, be that part of your contract. That's how AASHTO has chosen to address the need that's been talked about a lot at this meeting and other partnerships around the nation. I'm sure we'll have our stumbling blocks as we get into it. As though those who know COMP, again, it's a laborious process because any negative will derail. So you really, for those who are involved with the emulsion task force or want to get a standard through, you have to have your ducks in a row. You don't come with a draft version. You come with a version that is ready and is fully vetted. Because if it's not ready, it will take a while to get it through. That's the update as far as how AASHTO wants to handle pavement preservation. I think it's a good thing that they're taking it seriously, that they're devoting the resources in order to get these guide specifications, which I think will be very good for states to see.
Thank you. The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.